Okay, so it's time to start the second session, where I want to talk about guided XML authoring and focus on hints and inline actions. And Alex already, I think, when he presented the CSS alternatives used as layers, he used the map idea when you have different layers appearing on a map. So that's a very good analogy, I would say. And if you think about maps and directions, and what it was like 10 years ago when you had to go somewhere and you maybe printed all the directions, turn left on that street, then follow that for 10 kilometers, left on the other, and so on. That's in a way similar to learning a style guide, let's say, before starting to work. And then things changed, and now you have GPS systems right in your car that overlay on top of the map additional information. So you get instruction, hints on what to do next, right? So, and I think that the most important part is that they communicate to the driver information about what they are doing or what they are about to do at that point in time. And that information is placed over the map itself. So we can try to do the same thing, let's say, to try to guide users, to help them navigate from a template, a new document, to the final form of that document. And we try to do that. We try to communicate to the user. So, you know, whenever there is a validation error, you get, so when the structure is wrong, you get a message. And with the schematron validation, you can control, or the schema developer can control that message. So you can provide a tuned message that the user will actually understand. And quick fixes, which we'll present in the afternoon, will also help either to correct a generic error or, for the schematron case, to write a small script within the schematron schema that will implement an action to fix that problem. And then the challenge was, you know, how do we show information within the document, like the idea with the map. You have information presented on top of the map. Right? So how can we present information and actions directly in the document to try to keep the users and prevent them from actually creating those errors in the first place? And if we stretch this a little, then at some point we end up with this idea that the document itself will be the entire interface that the user interacts with in order to create the XML document. So no additional side views or toolbars, or so that's let's say the following step. So if we have a new DITA document, this is how it looks like in oXygen. If we create a new task, it has some information, but it doesn't tell a lot to a new user. If we bring in hints information, for instance, you know, like description of what we are supposed to do here, the first part says something about the entire document. Like this is a task topic and needs to help the user accomplish a task, and limit that to a single procedure. So it tells the goal of what they are supposed to create. And then for each element that is present in the document, let's say the information architect or the one that is responsible for those documents, can write these descriptions, and in this way communicate to the user what they are expected to create, for how they should write the titles, or what they should put in the short descriptions, or so on and so on. The other idea was to try to explore bringing the content model, what elements are possible to be inserted in a document, to make them visible in the user interface. So rather than pressing enter and seeing the possible elements that can be inserted, show like these placeholders, where if you will insert, let's say, a prologue element, here's the place where you will insert that. Or if you will insert a title alternatives, here is the place between title and short description, right? So that's not in the document, but if you click on that, you will get that element inserted in the document. So making the content model visible to the user. That was this idea of using inline actions, and just an experiment in the end to see how that works, how users will respond to this kind of user interface, because inline actions are also available right now in oXygen 16 and oXygen 17 through that framework customization, but enabling this possibility to define within the CSS actions, then I try to generate the content model, from the content model, let's say, generate actions dynamically in these places where an element is supposed to appear if it will be inserted.
Can you have any control over that? Supposing it's an element that's allowed, but it's the company policy not to use it, or is it just generated automatically?
Well, we'll get to that part later on. Basically, there are two, or you have full control over this, because it's the CSS that presents that information, right? So it depends on how you create that CSS, and that will show exactly what you put in the CSS file, and it doesn't have to be one-to-one linked to the schema. And in fact, for DITA and so I just developed an XML language, an XML file that describes the content model, and from that I generate the CSS. While for a Saxon configuration file, I generate this directly from the schema file. So for a Saxon configuration file, I implemented a visual. So Saxon has the XSLT and XML schema and XQuery processor that we include in oXygen from Saxonica, and they have a configuration file where you can tune different options for Saxon. There are many options that you can set. And for instance, the configuration file when you start may look like configuration and an element XSD, or to provide XSD XML schema related options. But then what you should enter. Rendering this in the author mode can display something like this with all the possible options, like use XSI schema location and the description, and this yes no option. So it's a lot easier to see what's available, what you can set, and what they mean, what those things mean. And as Alex already covered part of that, before 17 I was not able to create this kind of user interfaces, because for static content I had to write text. So if you had before, then the content property, you do not have, you cannot place a link maybe to allow the user to read more information, or format the content so it's easier to read. Maybe you want a list, or you want to emphasize some part of that, and so on. So I asked Alex to develop this HTML form control, so we can just point to next XHTML fragment and have that rendered as static content in the author view. Then this possibility to define inline actions allowed us to generate easily all these actions that represent the content model and show them in the document. And a big problem when I tried at some point, so I developed, for instance, if you have the curiosity to switch an XLT and relaxing schema, an XML schema, or a schematron schema to the author mode, you'll be pleasantly surprised with the nice view of those documents. And that was done like 6 years ago or so with the initial support that we had. And at some point I wanted to provide a better support for schematron, for editing a rendering schematron. We already had form controls, so we were able to edit attribute values, for instance. But then the problem that I had was I either put everything on in the interface, you know, all possible attributes of an element. Otherwise, I had to put rules. If this attribute is present, then I put that attribute editable, right? But then there were like 6 attributes, and you had to try to combine. If is the first one and the second one, is the first one and the third one, and you get 2 at power n different combinations, and it's not possible to actually work in this way. It's an exponential explosion, basically. So, and we discovered then that there's a draft CSS tree that says before n pseudo elements should be supported. That's a very interesting idea. And so we added this support for before n and after n pseudo elements, so that when you have the box that it's the content of the element, you can place before that or after that any number of pseudo elements, each containing static content. So then you can decide, let's say href, I handle href on 10, before 10, right? I handle, I don't know, test or another attribute on 9, another attribute on 8, 7, and so on, or 200, and so on and so on. So you can just focus, then your rules became simple, because then you say, if this element has this attribute, then I do this on before this element with this attribute before 10, and I put that content. Otherwise, I don't need to interfere with the other attributes, and the logic becomes a lot simpler. So this functionality made it possible for me to try to come up with these user interfaces. So here it's like what was before. We had only this on the before pseudo element. We can say content and provide some static content, right? And that will be displayed before the element. And with this HTML content, Alex presented that you can either write the HTML inline, but it's also possible to point to an HTML file and to an ID from that file. Right, so if you have an HTML file with, let's say, a div with an ID for each hint that you want to provide in the user interface, then you can use something like this to say hints HTML and provide the ID to bring that information within the document and make that available to the user. Alex already presented the inline action. So we have these oXygen functions that you can use on the content property. So along with static content, you can say, okay, but after or now put this form control, which can be either a drop-down, radio button, or a checkbox. So there are a number, a date picker, and also a button. So the user can click on that and perform a specific action. And your own, we have an API that allows you to define your own form control. And so we have this action and specify action ID that specified an action, defining the framework in the graphical part. But now we can add the action directly here. So if I want to insert a title, let's say I use this. I define an action that says title alternatives. So like the example you've seen earlier, right? So if I click on that title alternatives label, this is the label of the action, then this operation is invoked, which says insert fragment. Here's the fragment and the position where it should be inserted. You know, it's a reference node, and you say after that, inside that, as first child, as last child, and so on. And there are other options like schema aware, which means oXygen should make sure that's valid. Otherwise, we have a number of recovering strategies that try to find a valid place for that content, for instance, and they are you get a pop-up saying, you know, we can place this after or before or in a valid position. So here's the diagram that I tried to show with the before layers, right? So here's the element content, let's say, and you can put a before as a block. This before one is the same as before, and then you have before 2, before 5, let's say. This can be in line, so they will be one after the other, and then you have this as a block, and then another block here, right? And after, and so on. So the same for after blocks. So the larger n, the larger the how to say the parte, so the farthest from the you are from the element, right? So 1 will be next to the element, 2, and so on. We have also plans to support I think it's outer n, which is a pseudo element which encloses this element, right? It's it doesn't really exist. It's a virtual element that is the parent of this, let's say, right? But the idea with that, so right now, if you have a border, that border will be around everything. So if the element has a border, the border is like this, right? Outer means it's outside of this element. So right now, if I have a border for this, the before 6 will be inside that border. While if you have outer, that will be an outer before, that will be a before of the element which is a parent of this. So this border remains here, and that before will be outside of that border. So, you know, sometimes you may want to have this, and also the styles that are used, that are inherited. In this case, this will inherit some styles like the font family from the element, because it's part of, it's a before of this element. While if it will be an outer, it will inherit the styles of the parent of this element, right? So that you will see there are some, yes, there are some use cases that well, we'll hopefully, yeah, we'll see what it means. And this idea with so there are layers over layers in a way. These are you can also see this as layers, right? like before layers or after layers, because you can keep different things in different before boxes. And the alternative is idea where you select the main style and then you activate one or more of these. So we implemented the hints and inline actions as alternate styles, because you may not want to see them. Maybe once you are familiar and with that document type and you created like 50 documents, you already know everything, so you don't need to see that information. So they are, you can turn them on or off as you need, right? So and they are separate, so you can combine hints and actions, or show only hints or show only actions, and so on with other alternative style sheets. This is a checkbox in the framework configuration when we say I want alternatives to behave as layers, because otherwise an alternate style sheet will replace the main one. So if you enable that, then this will be, you have a choice between this, and then any choice you make will be, you will activate alternate styles on top of that. And for DITA, for instance, we have 9 main styles, and then we have 8 alternate styles. So if you count the number of possibilities, you have 2 to the power 8, like 0, 1, 0, 1, on off 8 to the power 8, multiplied with 9, and you get 2,304 possible ways to see a document.
Yes. You can bring themes in.
Yeah, of course, you get even more. But the idea is that a very simple, a very simple control. Well, it's not that difficult, because really like this code block syntax highlight, it doesn't really interact with hints or. But anyway, the idea is that you have a very simple control that allows you to quickly decide how you want to see and what you want to see in the document. Basically, being able to select from a huge number of possibilities the one that you actually want. And probably I should get to some to show you how I implemented this. So these ideas for DITA, for the Saxon configuration file, and for strategic markup language. It's a framework that I don't know if it is used that much, but we support in oXygen. I wanted to try to see if what I implemented for DITA translates to another XML language, let's say, easily, and how that works. So let's try to create a new task first. And now you can see the what Alex tried to show, the responsive part when the document, if we. So now it goes full width, and if you have a larger view, it has this page view, let's say. So from here, we can enable inline actions, and then we get these actions that tell me here you can insert title, alternative, prologue, prerequisite section. Here you can insert another step. Required step is marked with this background, so this is a required element. And a note can be inserted after the command, or a hazard statement can be inserted here, and so on. So if I just click, on prerequisites, I have the prerequisite section inserted, and no prerequisites, because that's 0 or 1, right? So it's an optional element. But if if we create a note here, then I have another node before, another node after, right? Because this is a repetitive model, and so on. So we added also these delete actions. So in case you want to delete something, then you can just place on that and remove that element.
Then there's a nice highlight showing you what is going to disappear.
Yep. So basically, if we delete almost everything, then we get the content model that we can expand. And as we insert something, you see that we get the other elements that can be inserted automatically laid out and being available at that point. And the problem, let's say, and why we want the outer N support, is that if I have an example, the result is placed. The result actually is between example and the steps element, but the action is placed here because it's on before. Is placed on the before example. Right, so it stays within the border of example. If that will be an outer N rather than a before N, then it will be outside that border. Because right now, if I click on result, that is created outside of that border. It's just, you know, that's what's available right now, and but it's still, you know, it's a result before that example element.
Did you generate this CSS from the schema file?
Now I'll get to show you how I've done it. Yeah, so there are two options. In this case, I wrote that from an XML description language. You know, just an XML file that describes the content model for what I want to generate in this CSS. But for the schematron configuration file, I generate that from the schema itself, from the XSD schema. So both things work. But for DITA, for instance, I didn't want to go and show all possible elements. Like, you know, if you insert an abstract, here you have 150 possibilities. If I will put them on the screen, it will not be that helpful, I think. Right, so I just picked the top level content models, let's say, and I expanded those to be made available online, and then the rest is like you know, document content, block content, and inlines. But the main structure of what you are trying to create is visible. I think. Let's try again. And then the other is hints. So if we bring also hints, so as I said, we can decide inline actions to remove inline actions, and now we have only hints. And we can put also inline actions and hints. So now if I insert title alternatives, I get that inserted, and also the description of what I'm supposed to do here. You know, what I'm supposed to enter within these title alternatives. In this hints mode, I control also this placeholder information. When the element is empty, we can bring a message to the user. We can do that also with matching on an empty element from CSS and using the content property to provide the content. But we also have an oXygen placeholder, oxy placeholder content that you can use for that. This is displayed specially, let's say, with this background that says I'm not here, you know, kind of thing. And also using this placeholder content, helps with the fact that the caret stays at the beginning. If you add content before, for instance, the caret will be to the right. I don't know. So now how I've done this and how you can apply that to other document types. But before that, let me show you, DITA has a new troubleshooting model in the next version. And here, if you do not have, let's turn off the hints. If you do not have these inline actions, then it's with this I can easily see, you know, that here I have a solution, a condition. I press on the condition. Within the solution, I have cause and remedy, so I can have multiple causes. A remedy has a title, responsible party, steps, and so on. So I can easily see that structure and create it immediately. For me, that was a new document type, right? Because for the task, it was like I was like, I already knew that. So what's new with this? I didn't understand exactly how that helps me. But when I use this for the troubleshooting topic, where I didn't know the content model, then I understood more clearly, you know, oh, I can do this, that immediately from that user interface. So that's why I wanted to show you this example. So now back to how this is done. Within the oXygen, we have this frameworks folder that contain the configuration we provide for DITA, Docbook, TI, XHTML, and so on and so on. So in the DITA framework, we have the CSS. We have these actions, and here I wrote this this XML document that says actions, and then I have a content model element with a parent that says the element that I want to provide actions for, like title alternatives, and then here the implied model is a sequence. So it's a sequence of nav title. Here's the long name is used to for the action name. If it's not present, it will use the element name. It will be nav title with a capital N if it's not provided. Like for author, for instance, here for the prologue, then the action will be author with a capital A. And then we have this occurs, which says 0 or star, as you have for DTDs, 0 or more, 0 or 1, and so on. For some elements, you can provide the fragment to be inserted. Otherwise, the fragment, but this is, you know, it can be your own format. It's just what I defined, and then I have an XSLT that looks at this and generates a CSS file. Okay. And the idea with the so you find here also the XSLT script that generates these actions. Basically, it's like 400 and something lines of XSLT that is applied on this. I'm not sure I will go into all the details of explaining this, but the idea is that there are, to map the content model into CSS rules. Basically, there are 4 type of rules in the CSS that we use. One is if an element is empty, then we present actions to insert all all the elements from the content model. So let's take a look at this. So in this case, when the task is empty, basically we show all the elements from the content model. and these are presented on different layers. So for instance, here you see that we have the title, which is on 311. We have title alternative on 312 on after. So on an empty element, after an empty element, we present title, title alternatives, and so on, all the elements that can be placed there, right? Now, if title is the last child, so you have a selector that says I'm in the task with the child title and column last child. This means title is the last child in the task. After that, we show the elements that follow that element in the content model. So what can be inserted after title in the content model of the task, right? Or if we insert the title alternatives, for instance, then title alternative is the first child, and before that we show all the elements in the content model in the task before title alternatives, right? And if you insert something like this, then we say if we have a task element which has a title immediately followed by a short description, then before that short description we show the elements between title and short description in the content model, right? So this is how the content model basically translates to CSS rules, and that style sheet generates dynamically all these actions that insert those elements in the document, right? And the hints part, for the hints part I have an HTML file with the with divs like hints minus abstract. So this describes the element abstract, for instance, and so on. And sometimes there may be specific hints like concept hints, short desk. So short desk can have a different description if it's in a concept or if it's in a task, and so on. So right here I have an ID that says these are not generic hints about the short desk. They are concept specific hints for short desk. So if you are not familiar with DITA, they have different document types. So a short desk element can appear in a topic, in a task, in a concept, and so on. So you may want to communicate to the user differently and say, for a concept the short desk should be like this. For a task the short desk should say this and that. And in this case I used the less, and the idea with less is that after this initial part where I define different rules that will have a border color, have a background color for hints, important hints have a different an orange color instead of yellow, and then we have this category which defaults to hints. So hints minus an element name is the default. It's a generic hint. So basically this says HTML content, look into the hints HTML and take as ID category minus the local name. So and the default category will be hints minus title, hints minus short desk, and so on, right? And concept hints says the category is concept minus hints. So then you have concept hint short desk, for instance. But after these 40 lines of less, then all we have to do is for an element topic we say show topic hints, important hint, make it orange, and then here's the placeholder. So all we have to do for an element to say I want to display hints for this element is to write in the HTML file the corresponding div with the ID, and then match in the CSS on that element and just say hints or topic hints or task hints. If we want to be more specific, that means the ID will be task minus hints minus shortest, for instance, and so on. So let's make things very easy at some point. So you further, if you maintain this, you just add an entry and like this, and say it's like declaring this is a hint. I want hint for this. I want a placeholder for this, because also this dot placeholder and saying and providing a string actually has this. So here is defined, has a content and a color, and says this matches the element. So if you say in the title, you say dot placeholder and provide the string, this translates to title empty, provides this color, shows, and then oxy placeholder content with that string, for instance, and so on. So you need to look into less, but the idea that what you need to remember is that you can make CSS a lot easy if you use less, right? So instead of, because you can look also at the generated, so the less file has 300 lines, and the generated CSS has 2,500 lines, right? So it's quite a difference if you have to write and maintain the CSS rather than that less file. Okay, in case of Saxon, we played also with so we have these actions, inline actions that are generated from the schema, but then I played also with pseudo classes, with custom pseudo classes. So when you have column hover, for instance, in the browser, you can underline that text, for instance, right? So you can write a rule in any browser that says a column hover, then and provide an underline for that link, right? Or change the color and so on. But there are also custom pseudo classes. Browsers also provide custom pseudo classes, and oXygen also provides custom pseudo classes. And in our case, you can control the pseudo class, and you can set that when you press when you invoke an action. So when I invoke an action, I can set a pseudo class on the element, and then that we have rules that match on that element having that pseudo class and provide different styles. And that different style is to show the description of this attribute, right? So the rendering changes of the document. I think I need to finalize this. Well, so in this case, we have everything generated from the schema. And if we look within the document, in the text mode, if we look in the text mode, we see, that we do not have content here. Everything is in the CSS that renders the document, basically. And you can find that in oXygen, in frameworks, XSLT, Saxon. Then here we have, so the schema file is annotated with these descriptions for each attribute, for instance, right? So allow external functions. This attribute has an annotation written in the schema as HTML, right? And from this schema file, we generate the hints. So we bring this annotation when you press. So when you press on that info icon, this comes from the schema document, from the annotation from the schema, because we generate this HTML file with the hints from the schema, extracting the annotations from the schema again with this annotate config to HTML generates the HTML file, and annotated config to CSS generates the CSS file used to render the Saxon configuration file. And I mentioned that so this strategic markup language, if we switch this to author mode, we have here actions and hints. So the same content model, the same style sheet that I used for DITA, and the same idea with the same list file that I used for DITA, I took this to this framework for strategic markup language, and I changed the content models to generate the actions, and I changed the XML file, the HTML with the descriptions to write descriptions for the elements from this language. And then I provided this for this kind of, user interface for also available for this strategic markup language, right? So applying that, just basically copying what we have for DITA and changing the content models and changing the descriptions and the CSS rules in the list file to match these elements and provide hints and inline actions for this strategy markup language. So I think I do not have more time. I can talk days probably about this, but the idea is that it explores ways to make to communicate to the user and to help them see and understand the structure and be able to turn that on and off when needed. So if you, I think until
we can take
Alex,
a few minutes for questions. We'll go on to the lunch break. No problem.
Oh. I'm sorry?
The sample files.
Oh, these are part of oXygen, so you can find them in frameworks. DITA, CSS, exactly where you see DITA framework / XLT / Saxon is the Saxon part. Framework / DITA / CSS, and then actions and hints are the parts for DITA. And I think the strategy markup language part is so it's framework, StratML, and then CSS, and part 1 ISO, CSS, and here you have the actions descriptor, which contains the content models for that language, and the hints part. So hints less, which basically the specific part here. So after the setup, the less setup to be able to say hints and things like that. The specific part for this is just this line, which for all elements says hints, and that's all. Right, so the specific part for this language, because in this case I didn't have hints specific for topic, task, for different document types. With the DITA framework handles the same framework handles multiple types of documents. This is just one type of document, so it was a lot easier. Yes.
I think it's very nice to say. I think it's time now to think about localization.
But for the hints, you can have, like you can define French hints, English hints as alternate style sheets, and just enable the one you want. Or maybe you want hints in both, English and French. I don't know. So the user can have the choice to see hints in a specific language, for instance. So that may be, so that works right now. In the future, we can think about that as well. Okay. So thank you, and hopefully the lunch is already here.